I had a really scary experience a couple of years ago. Now, during this time, I was back at my parents' house for the summer after my freshman year of college. I have a best friend named Jake, and he lived about 2 blocks away. We would walk to each other's houses all the time. We played video games together and had played on the same basketball team in high school even. One night that summer, I was at home and in my bedroom. I had recently gotten back from my part-time summer job that I had. I went on Snapchat to respond to some snaps I'd gotten and see what was going on with all of my friends. I saw that Jake had posted a story. Jake would occasionally post Snapchat stories like most of my friends, but he wasn't known to post often or post anything crazy really. He was a pretty calm and chill guy, so what I saw that he'd posted was really odd and out of character for him. I noticed there were about 10 Snapchat videos from him, a few pictures as well. Each one seemed really random and hard to tell what it even was. Some appeared to be of the ground at nighttime, others of the floor of a house. In a few of them, you could even see other people's feet. You couldn't tell who anybody was though, and I couldn't make out anybody speaking in the videos either. It was just really bizarre and completely unlike him to be posting things like this. I responded and asked him what was going on exactly. Within minutes, he had seen my response. He opened it but didn't reply. The stories had all been posted an hour earlier. I really wanted to know what was going on. I decided to walk over to his house, even though it was like 10 o'clock at night. We were that close of friends. I walked the 10 minutes it took to get to his place, and then knocked on his front door. Jake answered it and asked me what was going on. I told him that I'd seen his weird stuff on Snapchat, and I was wondering if something was wrong with him. He was confused. He told me he didn't post anything. He went on to say that he'd lost his phone earlier that morning and he'd been trying to find it everywhere, but he couldn't find it no matter where he looked. He asked me what had been posted on his account. I went inside and we both went over the stuff that had been posted. I showed it to him. He realized that somebody must have found his phone and taken it. They were now posting to his Snapchat. Based on the videos and pictures themselves, there was really not much to go on. It's not like we were master detectives. We also didn't know why on earth somebody would take his phone and start posting these random things at all. We suddenly remembered the snap map though. Jake had his location turned on. We both figured that whoever had taken the phone would have likely turned it off, but we decided to look anyways just in case. As we checked, we saw the location was actually still on. It showed exactly on the map where his phone was. It was only about 10 minutes ago it had last been used. We compared it to Google Maps and soon found the exact address. To our surprise, it was a house that was only a 10-minute drive from where we were. Jake and I both decided to go to the house together. We left Jake's house and got into his car. Then we followed the directions to get to that address. None of us had been to this area of the neighborhood before. When we got there, we saw it didn't appear to be the best neighborhood. The houses were small and not very nice looking. They all seemed run down and the yards were overgrown. We saw several broken down looking cars. Nevertheless, we parked on the side of the road in front of the house. We both got out and walked up to the front door. We then confirmed that this was in fact where his phone had been. Jake firmly knocked on the front door. After a few seconds, we saw the curtains from the front window open for just a split second. We looked over to see somebody ducking back and shutting the curtains quickly. They clearly did not want to be seen. Jake then shouted from the other side of the door. He said he'd lost his phone earlier in the day, and the location was showing it had to be here. He said the only thing he wanted was his phone back. They could just throw it out the door to him and we would leave. We got nothing in response. About a minute later, though, we heard a noise coming from behind the house. Somebody was back there and outside now. This was a really bad idea, but we decided to go around back and confront them. We left the front step and walked around the side of the home. We hadn't even made it around to the backyard yet when Jake spoke again. He basically said the same thing that he had said before. All he wanted was his phone returned to him. He was mad that somebody had stolen it, so I guess I can't really blame him. All of a sudden, though, we heard some yelling and the sound of people running. There were men's voices, and they were telling us to get the fuck out of there. I saw for a brief second at least 3 men running full speed at us. Jake and I took off. The guys were a ways back, but approaching quickly. We ran into the front yard and then into the street. The guys were going so fast behind us that we wouldn't be able to make it to Jake's car and get inside on time. Instead, we were forced to run past his car and further down the street. We were both decently fast guys, but the people behind us seemed to be almost as fast as we were. We made it to the end of that street and then ran into the next one over. The guys behind us seemed to stop chasing us at that point. There was a little park, so we ran in there and hid behind some trees. We stopped to catch our breath, and we tried to figure out what to do. We stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, then carefully crept our way back to Jake's car. When we got to his car, we didn't see anybody outside or near the house. After that, we just left. We went back to Jake's, and he said he would just have to buy a new phone, he guessed. At least we had tried to get it back. Looking back at that night, we probably should have not gone to the house by ourselves. It could have been far more dangerous, but we didn't really think about it. The location on Jake's phone was turned off after that incident, so I don't know what happened to it. I do know that Jake ended up getting a new phone. I use Snapchat a lot to talk to friends. I never thought I would have a scary experience on it. There have been times people have added me and I didn't really know who they were, but nothing strange ever happened because of that. Usually it was either just a bot or somebody I'd never heard from. Well, one day I got added on Snapchat by somebody I didn't know yet again. The name was very generic sounding. I believe it was John Johnson or something like that with no space between the first and last name. Seemed pretty fake to me. Immediately, this person sent me a picture. I opened it, and the very first thing I saw was a close-up picture of a guy wearing a really creepy-looking mask. The mask fully covered his face and was almost the same tone as his skin color. It was smiling so you could see all the teeth. The eyes also appeared to be all white. It was very weird to see. I figured it was some kind of joke. I did not send a picture back, but responded by asking who this was. He sent another picture of basically the same thing. I was creeped out by it and did not respond again. Instead, I just blocked his account. I didn't even know who he was, but I really didn't appreciate him sending me creepy pictures like that. After that, I was not added by any other accounts for the rest of the night. I also didn't get any more strange messages either. The story does not end there though. I work an office job that's about 15 minutes away from where I live, and right by the city. I'm there in the office every weekday. One day after work, I was leaving. I park in a parking garage that's attached to the building. I was up on the 3rd level. By now, there were quite a few cars still around, but it wasn't as packed as when I'd got there. I got inside my car when something caught my eye. There was a man walking through the parking garage, wearing the exact same mask I had seen in that Snapchat. I didn't waste any time. I drove away immediately. I didn't want to wait to see that guy get into a car and try and follow me or something. The whole way home, I couldn't believe I had seen that. It had to be the exact same guy. Somehow, he knew who I was. He was wearing that exact same creepy mask, too. After that day, I didn't see him again. I did try to report the incident, but nothing came of it, and I still don't know who that guy was to this very day. I have a horror story from Snapchat that happened just last year. I use Snapchat quite a bit and communicate with my friends on there a lot. I post stories fairly frequently as well. I've had that account for almost 10 years, and over time I've accumulated a lot of friends on the app. When I post a story, sometimes friends will reply to them and say whatever they will. Now, starting last year, every time I posted anything, this one guy would seem to reply to it every time. I didn't know who he was or when I added him. His name on Snapchat was Dave. I don't have any idea when we first made contact or anything, but he would always say things that were sort of creepy. One example that stood out to me was when I posted a picture of my new apartment. The picture was just something standard, like of the living room and kitchen. He responded by saying, "I wish I knew where you lived." It was almost like he was purposely trying to be weird every time. I never bothered to delete him or anything though. I didn't really think it was too much of a problem. I mean, he never even attempted to contact me outside of these weird responses to my posts. Eventually though, I did get tired of it and deleted him from my account. I didn't really think anything of it after doing so, but the next day, a brand new account added me on Snapchat. I didn't know that it was him making a different one. I added this person back out of curiosity because I had no idea who it was. Immediately, he sent me a message asking why I deleted him. I realized who it was pretty quickly and deleted that account too. Not long after, he tried to add me again with another one, but I did not add him back this time. He kept trying using different usernames, but I knew that all of them were still him. The very next day, I got a text on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. I said hi and asked who it was. It took me until the third message for me to realize it was that same guy. He started cursing me out, calling me terrible things. He was very clearly angry at how I kept ignoring him. I blocked the number after he sent me about 20 texts in the span of 2 minutes. This couldn't stop him, however. As most of you know, there are apps and websites where you can get new phone numbers for free. I've never really used one, but I know that they exist. I'm guessing that's what this guy was doing. Because every time I'd block a number, I'd get another text a short while later, very clearly still him. Block that number, a short time later a new number would pop up. This time though, he left a voicemail. I listened to it. The man sounded much older than me. He basically called me every name in the book and threatened very graphic things against me. I blocked that number and this continued on for several days. I tried to ignore it as best I could. I kept on blocking these hundreds of numbers. Soon though, I decided to just get a new phone. I sort of needed one anyways. I decided to get a new number while I was at it and change my Snapchat username too. After I'd changed all my information, I guess I lost the guy. After that, I never heard from him again, and I really hope it continues to stay that way. I had just moved into my own place not long after graduating from high school. I went to study in the technical school outside of my hometown. It was the first time I had ever lived by myself, and it was there that something very creepy happened to me. My mom helped me pick the apartment. She wanted to make sure it was a safe place to live. I'm the sort of girl who's lived a very sheltered life, and my mom is a warrior type. This place is so close to the school, everyone will be able to save you, and you'll be in the public view, she said. Sometimes, however, protection can be very annoying. I had my own anxieties about moving in, but overall I was excited by the freedom of having my own place. Several days later, my TV arrived. The one I'd ordered was not a very big one. It took just one person to deliver it. The delivery man brought it to my room. As I looked at it, I thought to myself, "Ah, shit, what am I supposed to do with this?" Looking back on it, it was pretty embarrassing that I didn't know how to wire or set up a TV myself. I still don't really. There are many things I didn't have the opportunity to learn. The delivery man looked at me for a moment and asked politely, "Do you need some help with this?" I was so grateful, I invited him in. He seemed like an expert. The TV was set up and installed in no time at all. At that point, I blurted out, "Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much." I was really grateful for his help. The next day, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I went over to the peephole to have a look and see who it could be. Needless to say, I was very surprised to see the guy who had installed the TV was there yet again. What is this guy doing here? I wondered. Panic began to stir up inside of me. I thought I'd just ignore it and pretend to be out. From that point onward, though, he began to show up and ring my doorbell every day. I was getting really frightened now. He was showing up every single day. It was horrible. Sometimes he wouldn't even ring the doorbell, but I still checked and saw he was there. I didn't say a word. I just kept on ignoring him. I mean, what else could I really do? This guy was really creepy and would not go away. I was here all by myself, though. I was just praying that one of these times he wouldn't get impatient and start kicking the door down. One day, after a while of silence, I was wondering if he had gone away already. I crept over to the peephole to check. "Ah, there you are. Can you open the door now?" he said, with a big smirk on his face. After that, I went to one of my college friends' apartments as often as I could. I was pretty sure I was inconveniencing my friend. They kept asking me what was wrong, but I didn't really want to talk about it. I just dodged the question. All of this was due to my meek personality. I wanted to go back to my place, but I also wanted to take my friend with me, just in case. I didn't know how I would react if I went back and that guy was there waiting. When I finally explained what was going on, they told me I was just overreacting. My friend told me that my reaction to him and letting him in to set up my TV might have led him on. Maybe he interpreted my gratitude as affection. I thought that a man like that should know not to bother a young woman living alone, though. Because of what my friend said, though, I didn't really know what to do. After a while, he finally gave up and went away, and I haven't heard from him since. I still get terrified every time I hear the doorbell ring, though. And please be careful if you live alone, especially if you're a woman, and especially if you have a non-confrontational personality like me. This story happened years ago when my friends and I were really into Pokemon. This objectively may not be the scariest story you've ever heard, but to me it's one of the most unnerving things that's ever happened to me. When I think about the implications of what happened, I still can't believe people are this horrible. As I said before, my friends and I really like Pokemon. The cards were cool, but we were fans of the games more so, and we loved to play them competitively. At the time, the games Sun and Moon had just come out. They were being heavily promoted at gaming and Nintendo conferences across the country. A gaming event was coming to our hometown, and the new Sun and Moon games were going to be heavily featured, as well as a rumored competitive battle tournament. Needless to say, we could not miss this event. Let's fast forward a few months. We got our tickets and were excited about this event. We later learned that you needed to qualify for the tournament, though. We hadn't done so we were a bit upset about that. We were still excited about the experience nonetheless. At the very least, we could be spectators for the top-level competitive play, which sounded awesome. We weren't exactly sports guys, so this was kind of like our own version of the Super Bowl. We spent the entire day taking pictures, talking to other Poke fans, and watching battles in the main convention hall. Around 4 in the afternoon, I was confronted by a taller man who looked like an official of the event. He was wearing the same khakis and polo shirts as the staff and had a laminated badge hanging on a lanyard around his neck. He had a very confident and professional tone. He leaned in and spoke to me. "Hey there, friend. I can't help but notice you and your friends there look like superfans. Is that correct?" "Of course," I answered with an energetic response. Being at these types of events with other people who share your interests always pumps you up and you feel real energetic. He laughed and we made some small talk for a while. One thing led to another, and then the man said this. "Well, the reason I approached your little group today is for an unbelievable offer. You see, I work for Nintendo and we're planning on unveiling a new battle mechanic in the next Pokémon game. We need some folks to test the mechanics. Would you and your friends be interested?" I didn't even respond to the man. I just bowed my head and shook his hand. I was so excited I couldn't even think of the words to say. One of my friends who was standing there started to jump up and down like he'd just won the lottery. The man laughed a bit. Okay. You guys have to keep this quiet though, since obviously we haven't announced the new game yet. Meet me and my team at this location tonight at 8 p.m. and we'll start our testing. Remember though, you can't say anything. Oh, and my secretary will have you fill out some non-disclosure agreements when you arrive at the location. All right? The man handed me a handwritten note with an address written on it. The paper was signed with a name that was pretty much illegible. Before anybody out there starts judging us, remember we were young and naive. The atmosphere of the event had us thinking about what we wanted instead of what was clearly logical, and this man was dressed as if he was a member of staff. When he was talking about non-disclosure agreements and all that stuff, it made him sound more legitimate. I was about to realize just how stupid and idiotic me and my friends truly were, though. We stayed at the event for a few more hours, then made our way to the address the man had given us. We pulled into this lot right next to a big abandoned-looking building. There was an old furniture store sign above the door of the building, which told us the building used to be some sort of furniture warehouse that was clearly not in business anymore. We lingered in the car for a minute or so. The situation was clearly kind of weird. We justified the weirdness by convincing ourselves they must need a secure location to test sensitive material. The guy gave us no reason not to trust him, other than the fact he didn't give us a name or a business card, but we wouldn't think about that little variable until later. There were about 6 cars in the parking lot, so we figured that someone must definitely be inside. It didn't take a lot of convincing ourselves that this was a legit opportunity, and we would really regret it if we passed it up. Against all our better judgment, we got out of the car and slowly made our way to the door. It was locked, so we knocked rather hard, but there was no answer. We looked through the glass on the door. It looked like a dark and abandoned warehouse. One of our friends suggested we should just leave, but everyone else pretty much ignored him. We all wanted this to really be real. While we were standing out front trying to figure out what to do, we heard a grinding sound. We looked at the side of the building, only to see an overhead door opening, the type meant for trailers to unload. A very skinny and frail-looking woman came out and told us to come on over so we could get started. We all felt a little bit of hesitation towards this woman. Her appearance looked nothing like someone who would be in a professional setting. Her hair was greasy, her clothes were messed up, they even seemed to be tattered and covered in holes. Most notably, though, she was swaying back and forth as she was trying to summon us. I just happened to look through the window on the door one last time before we started walking over, and I saw 2 people crouched next to the overhead door. I hadn't seen them when we'd originally looked into the window, but after the door was open, the streetlight was shining in, and it was clear to see at that point. I didn't say anything. I just suddenly alerted my friends that we needed to leave. One of my friends said to the woman that we'd forgotten something in the car and we'd be back in just one moment. We all started to move back toward the parking lot. The woman tried to say something, but it was completely incoherent. When we were just about to get in the car, we heard multiple footsteps behind us. As we entered the vehicle, we saw 2 people with the woman. All 3 of them were directly coming towards our car. We started it up and peeled out of there. We drove for hours. Thankfully, it didn't seem like they followed us, but we weren't exactly sure. That's why we drove nearly all night, just in case they did so. We did call the police and report this entire event, but the warehouse was completely empty by the time they arrived. At that point, they couldn't really do anything, since these people didn't physically harm us, I guess. I have no idea what these people wanted from us. It used to keep me up at night thinking about it. Be careful meeting people out there, and don't be afraid to ask serious questions, because sometimes things really can be too good to be true. I think my love for collecting cards stems back from my early childhood, when my dad and I used to open packs together. I remember specifically going around and grabbing Pokemon cards and Beanie Babies when I was a kid. Usually, if I did good on a test or got a good report card, I could get a pack of cards or something that my dad and I would look at together. Now fast forward about 20 years. I still collect the cards and enjoy opening them with my friends and family. I learned pretty early on in collecting that I couldn't keep everything, so I sold off most of my collection and only really keep items of value that I have the space for or that have some sentimental value to me. The pandemic surge really made me wish I held on to some of those items longer though. Anyway, I don't really collect anything specifically, just items that catch my eye, ranging from horror cards like Jaws and Fright Flicks to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Even some occasional football or basketball cards as well. For years, I belonged to forums, which then morphed into Facebook and Reddit pages. On these sites, you meet tons of people who like to share their collections, trade, and even sell cards to each other. I made a few acquaintances and even a couple of friends over the years through these different forms of media, but one experience I had always sticks out more than the others. That was the time I met Roger. Roger was someone I met online, who also had an interest in error cards. You know, something is off-center or perhaps misprinted during the manufacturing process. We talked casually for what I would guesstimate was 6 to 8 months, until he sent me a message about a card convention. The message stuck out to me because I remember him saying, "Hey, I saw this collectible card convention and card show that wasn't far from where you are. Are you considering going maybe?" I remember my immediate response was, "How do you know that show is close to me?" I don't discuss my city or state online. I don't remember the exact response he gave, but I think he said something along the lines that he'd picked it up from my socials and some of the pictures I'd posted. Either way, I said, yeah, I was planning on going to the convention to look around, maybe even thin out my collection a little. He mentioned that he was also attending, and that we should meet up IRL and get a drink or coffee or take a tour of the convention together. I agreed and figured there wouldn't really be any harm in meeting someone I'd chatted with pretty regularly, especially in a public setting like a convention. The day came and I was waiting to meet up with Roger. I got a tap on the shoulder and turned around. Can I help you?" "Hey, it's me, Roger." I responded pretty quickly. "Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize you. You look so different than you do on all your socials." "Oh yeah, I took all those pictures a long time ago." I remember trying to steer the conversation. "Well, it's good to finally meet you." I was thinking to myself though, this is a completely different person to the images on the social media pages. They looked nothing alike, not even remotely close. Before I could even process anything else though, Roger said, "I want to introduce you to my friend Todd." I stuck out my hand, but this Todd guy completely ignored it and didn't say anything to me. "Don't worry, he's just shy. He'll warm up eventually." I was already regretting my decision to meet up with someone I didn't really know that well. I said we should go in and take a look around. Everyone agreed and we all headed in. In all honesty, it was an amazing show. There were so many cool collectibles and cards. I didn't end up getting anything for myself that day though. Like I said, at the time I was trying to thin out my collection, rather than increase its size. As we approached different areas and booths, I became more comfortable being around Todd and Roger. Todd was quite rude though, and Roger just seemed to go along with everything he said. I ended up getting very quiet eventually, and even though I had seen a lot of cool things with them, I was trying to plan my escape from these people. Roger had to run to the bathroom eventually, and I was left alone with Todd. Well, I think I'm gonna head out when Roger gets back. I have some stuff to take care of when I get home. For the very first time that day, Todd turned and looked at me. He spoke in a very firm voice. No, you're not. We made this trip all the way here, and you're gonna make it worthwhile for us. I asked him what he meant, but just as he was about to respond, Roger came back and interrupted. All right, guys, what's up next? I said I had to head home because I had a lot of stuff to do with my family. Roger's smile immediately turned to a frown. Well, if you want to be rude and take off, that's your choice. I ignored it and got up. I walked off as fast as I could. At that point, the first thing I was thinking was that I was going to block Roger on any app we had together. I got home and told my wife what happened. She seemed disinterested and said something like, I told you everyone online is creepy. I tried to put the events from that day out of my head, but I was still feeling a bit uneasy and anxious. I decided to go to bed early around 8:30 or so. I was woken up to a loud bang at 1 a.m. I couldn't tell what it was, but it sounded like a table or chair had been tipped over. I told my wife to go back to sleep, and I would go check out what it was. I looked around the house and couldn't really find anything out of place. I went down to the basement though, and what I saw still gives me a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach whenever I think about it. I saw Todd from earlier, grabbing storage totes and carrying them up my storm doors. If you don't know what those are, they're like the Wizard of Oz basement doors that lead to your backyard directly from your basement. I screamed. What the hell is going on here? Todd dropped the totes and flew up the stairs. I tried to follow, but by the time I got up, he had run past the fence that had been open and jumped into a black van. It then sped off. I think it took a good 10 to 15 minutes for everything to sink in and for my adrenaline to lower. I went inside and told my wife, and we called the police immediately. I told them everything about Roger and Todd, from my conversations over several months with Roger, all the way up to meeting them that day. The police said they most likely gained information on some items in my collection and scheduled the meetup to try and tell me and find out where those items were located. It made sense, honestly. I don't have any other idea how Roger would have found out where I lived. That's assuming Roger was actually involved, which I told the police that he would have had to have been. Nothing ever really came from the investigation though, and unfortunately I didn't have enough info for the police to do anything about it. They hadn't managed to actually steal very much, and honestly it was of little value what they did take, so I didn't really care. I was just glad my family and I were okay. I still open up cards every now and again with my wife, but if I do buy or sell, I do it through eBay or other selling sites now, and I always make sure to use my P.O. box as an address instead. I haven't been to any convention or card shows since this incident, and if I'm being honest, I don't see myself doing so at any point in the near future. First, let me explain as to why I was traveling alone in this story. One of my best friends, Kayla, and I worked seasonally at a hiking lodge for the summer. We're both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto. We decided this year, since I'd bought a car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully. So wonderfully, in fact, that we ended up staying a bit longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip short. Now, my friend Kayla started her schooling on November 1st. I dropped her off at home in New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed the night at her place, planning to head back to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I could not come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia. Knowing I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1st at the Acolyte Hostel on Cabot Trail. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed because I had waited until the last minute to book a private dorm with a queen-sized bed. This option was for $35 though. I thought to myself, what a bargain. I booked immediately. I left Kayla's house at 7 a.m., knowing it was going to be a long drive to my destination. The Cabot Trail was roughly 150 kilometers long. So I thought to be safe, I'd plug the hostel's address into my Google Maps and head straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel at roughly noon. Knowing it was too early to check in, I figured I'd consult with the front desk when I arrived, figure out the nearby hiking trails, and bring my bags in at least. I was about to arrive at my hostel, at least according to Google Maps. All around me, though, was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me that my destination was on my left, but I saw nothing at all. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar bent to look like the letter A, spray-painted bright red. I was staying at the Acolyte Hostel, so I guess that must be the place. I followed the dirt road, and it led me as to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn. There was no signage at all. There were 2 cars parked out front, so I parked alongside and got out of my car to try and figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man in his mid-40s with dark hair and very intense eyes popped out of the barn right away and asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes, and he asked why I'd booked so last minute. I explained my situation to him, and seemingly satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed was that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around its foundation, about 5 feet deep or so. He led me across some particle board that was laid down as a sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about this property was that there were no windows at all. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin. He proceeded to tell me his grand plans for this space. It all seemed really far-fetched. All I could see was an old barn with particle boards separating most of the rooms. He led me up some skeleton stairs made of plywood and random 2x4s to the cabin loft where I would be sleeping that night, along with his family, the mother of his 5-year-old son, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted I call her mom as well. The upstairs was certainly an open concept. A frail curtain was all that separated the beds. To the side was a large open area in the middle. I asked if I was his only occupant that night, and he said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get many stayers. I told him I was interested in the hikes in the area and wanted to go to them before it got dark. He gave me a very detailed instruction of his favorite trails and how to get to them. Off I went. I figured the place was certainly not ideal. I wish the website would have let me know it was still being built. But hey, I booked it last minute and beggars can't really be choosers. Plus, the man was very friendly and helpful with hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, but I figured I'd be heading into town for dinner anyway. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season it was basically a ghost town. It was such a ghost town, even the liquor store was closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark and dingy empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase it lightly, disappointing. I had this super romantic image in my head of me sitting there on the harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back some ocean-fresh oysters. That was not what I got, needless to say. Being exhausted, I figured I should just head back up to the hostel and read my book. I got back around 8 p.m. I could smell the family that lived there was in the midst of cooking dinner. A boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name's JP. What's yours?" "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He asked me if I wanted to come play. I said definitely. Just let me put my bags down in my room first. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room. Instead of getting settled in, I headed straight out to the main area. I started throwing a foam ball around with JP. His mother, father, and grandmother all just sat down to eat, staring at us right in front of them without saying anything. At some point, the mother and father started what seemed like a random argument, which turned into them full-blown screaming at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP I needed to go to my room and call my mom, as she was surely wondering where I was. Of course, the boy didn't understand proper boundaries yet and followed me through my curtains. He sat on my bed as well. I tried taking his attention away from his family's fierce fighting, so I started asking him where he went to school, what his favorite color was. His mother started calling for him. He didn't answer, and instead chose to sit on my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yelled to the mother that he was in my room. She ran in and snatched him, then yelled to the father, "I know what you're like when you get this angry. I'm taking JP, so don't follow us." I heard her book it down the stairs, and him running after her. I heard a car start up in the lot, and not just drive away, but peel out of the driveway. I heard the man cursing, the door slamming, and the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier that day coming on. I guess he wanted to do some handiwork to let off some steam. Now I was just left upstairs. I walked out of my not-so-private curtain room with my bag and said, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts and all, but I think I should really get going." The grandma started grabbing my arm and telling me to stay. I was about ready to tell her to screw off and just leave until I realized she still had the knife in her hand from cooking dinner. I went along with what she was saying while she rubbed my arm with one hand and flailed the knife around with the other. I inched closer and closer downstairs and toward the door. She kept rubbing my arm and shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay and that her grandson was real special. Before I'd even booked the night's stay, he'd had a premonition that I would be staying with them. As soon as I got out the door, I ran towards my car and started the engine. I backed up to get out of there. Kevin and the excavator blocked my path. Kevin, with his excavator, had blocked the path out with a 5-foot ditch. He got out and said he was sorry and told me I had to stay. He'd make it up to me. The grandma came out with a knife still in her hand, saying it was all Kevin's fault I was leaving. They started to really bicker. I yelled that if they didn't let me leave right now, I was calling the police. They got super defensive, like I was the one being unreasonable. I started to dial on my phone. Kevin got back in his excavator and made a little path so I could get out. I drove across the grass and ripped out of the drive. I'm sure it did a number on my suspension. As soon as the property was out of sight, I went to call my friend Kayla. No service at all. I drove 6 hours and stayed with Kayla instead.